Harry.
Oh, morning to Peregrine.
How are we this morning?
Right as a button, sharp as a knife, sir.
Good, good. Does anybody care to answer the diagnosis?
Mr. Wilson.
Something electrical, sir?
They don't get any brighter, Doc, do they? Unlike my picture.
Spit it out, man.
He thinks he's our colour television, sir.
Not very perspicacious. Anything else?
Does he have teletext?
Of course I have. Come on.
Remote control?
You're missing something, Mr. Hughes.
He's a Philips colour television, sir.
Good. So?
Classic case of delusions of grandeur, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. I'm glad I can rely on someone. Onward, ever onward. Back into bed, Mr. Crockett. Come along.
Sharp picture, remote control, teletext. Wouldn't you like to be a Philips colour television?
Hello, I'm Carl Attrell, and you're listening to Teletext People. Teletext People is a social record of people that have been involved in either the production or the restoration or the artwork of the blocky medium that once dominated our TV screens in Great Britain before 2012. In the series, you will hear from the pioneers, the people who made it tick, and also people who have only recently visited the teletext medium but are in their own way keeping it alive for the preservation for others in the future. In this episode, we speak to Alistair Cree, creator of the ZXNET teletext editor and, amongst other things, an archivist of all things teletext and a technical guru. I started by asking Alistair what teletext meant to him.
Teletext for me was the computer when I was sort of, 5 or 6, because we had one computer in the house and that was my dad's, and he used it for boring things. So we'd maybe get an hour to play on the computer, but then the rest of the day, if I wanted to read words off a shiny screen, it was sitting in front of the telly pressing the buttons. Looking at Bamboozle and Turn of the Worm and reading the letters pages on CFAX, things like that. So I've always been into computers, and CFAX was my first computer essentially.
All right. And how old were you when you first started using the teletext on the telly?
Well, I mean, it's as long as I can remember really. I remember we had a TV before the one that I can kind of remember vividly in my head, the remote and everything, and I don't know whether that had teletext or not. Certainly I don't remember Oracle. I only remember CFAX and Teletext Limited, so early to mid 90s onwards really is what I remember of teletext. So one of my earliest teletext projects, as it were, was designing what my service would be like, and very much in the technical side of things. I downloaded, found a website with all the teletext specification and things like that. So as an 11-year-old or whatever, I was poring over this teletext, all the bit stream, working out how it would work. But obviously at that point I had no way of really generating a teletext signal, long before Raspberry Pis and so on. So that got put aside and forgotten about again until really 2016, I suppose, when I came across the Facebook group and found, actually there's other people out there interested in teletext, and that's how I got back into it at that point. It was just around the time that the first event that you did at the Cambridge Centre for Computing History, which I didn't come to, but either you or Dan had invited me down to meet up, but I didn't come down then. But that was really about the time I got more involved in all the stuff that was going on, and that was later that year in about October 2016. That was when I started writing my teletext editor.
How did you go about sort of designing that? How was that made?
Well, it was very inspired by Simon Rawls's EditTF site. And I mean, in 2016, I just started experimenting with some code to see what I could do, really, because I was interested in the higher level teletext features, all the extra colours and so on. So really, it started out as a project just to write code to render a page with all the extra colours and so on available. It took quite a long time before it turned into a usable editor, of course, but I'd started that in October 2016 and worked on that through that winter to where it was in a usable state for people to have a go on it by February, when we had the next event at Cambridge. Mostly the design of the interface was inspired by Simon's editor, and then I gradually built on that feature by feature. There's quite a few things that it's missing in terms of implementing all of the parts of the teletext specification. So there's the big one that it sort of annoys me that I've not made more progress on it, is something called objects, where you can have predefined programmed bits of enhancement data that can be placed anywhere on a teletext page, but that's very difficult to implement. So it's one of those things I keep procrastinating and putting it off. But one of these days I'll sit down and get my head around it. That's the next big feature, as it were. The other thing is I want to hook it up to a database system so that I can have multiple users working on a teletext service. It's similar to the way the block party editing server that I wrote for the event at Cambridge works. But again, that's a big undertaking that's going to take a lot of rewriting of stuff, so I keep pushing it a bit further away and a bit further.
I noticed when you use the editor, you have the option of using something called level 2.5 teletext. Would you be able to explain to me how 2.5 level teletext differs from the teletext that I might have been viewing on my own television back in the day?
Well, I can give it a go. The basic teletext as devised in the 70s, and that's retrospectively been called level 1, is just 40 columns, 25 rows of text and graphics characters. Really, it's 1,000 bytes, and each of those cells on the screen can be text or it can be graphics and so on. But to enhance that, they developed a system where it's more like the French Minitel system, where things can be placed on the display without needing control characters to change them, so-called non-spacing attributes. So if you, instead of having to have a red control code and then some text which would be red, and then a yellow control code and text which would be yellow, you can have the text on the screen, and in level 2.5 you can say, at this cursor position on the screen I want the text to be red, and over here elsewhere on the screen I want the text to be yellow, without needing to take up spaces with control codes. That's the biggest difference, really. It put the extra data to describe those things elsewhere than inside the teletext page, because in level 1 you've got those 1,000 bytes, and that's all you've got. If you want to change a colour, you've got to give up one of those bytes to change the colour. So if they'd made the facility to have more colours and so on, it would have used up more space for the control codes. So there's always a trade-off in teletext, that you want to get the best get the most features without wasting the bandwidth because it's so limited. The broadcasters, particularly the IBA, had done a lot of experimentation with these new techniques, and that was the extra colours and so on, and extra mosaic graphics and so on was designated level 2. Then there were more features and so on proposed and tested that were designated level 3, but then none of that was really implemented because it would have taken very expensive electronics, so the television manufacturers weren't interested and so on, because it would make the cassettes cost too much. So it wasn't really taken forwards. All there were a few test broadcasts, but then when the Teletext specification was republished in 97, I think it was, as the enhanced Teletext specification, some of the features from level 3 had been added to the features from level 2, and they designated what they'd mixed it all together. They designated level 2.5. The level 2.5 from the late 90s onwards, that was implemented by a few here and there broadcasters in mainland Europe. So I think there's a Dutch broadcaster used it, and one of the German broadcasters, ZDF, used it. Not in any great amount, but it was at least broadcast, and television manufacturers began to implement the level 2.5 features into their sets. So even at the very end of CRT televisions being on the market, there's a few of those with level 2.5.
Just a reminder that if you're listening to this on your favourite podcast app, you can also find this on the YouTube channel. And if you are watching on YouTube, you can find us on your favourite podcasting app. You can find out ways that you can help with the show in the show notes.
Later in 2017, I broke the rendering code out of the editor into a separate sort of module that the editor could use, but then also used that to develop the online viewer. So that's the heart of the editor code, really ripped out into a separate project to be able to take teletext packets, a teletext packet stream from, for example, VBit2, or from a teletext recovery, or from a recording off air, and feed that into the online viewer so that you can experience the packets just as though you were using a teletext TV from maybe the late 90s. That's been particularly popular, and since I wrote that that was in the end of 2017, that was broken out into its own code. Since then, I was approached by the website TV Arc in 2018 to ask if I could help them with developing an online teletext service for TV Arc, and I said, well, I could do better than help you with it. I've already got all the code. Do you want to use it? So they've had a copy of the teletext viewer on TV Arc, and Nathan Dane, who wrote the NMS CFAX recreation, he also has a copy of my viewer code on his server to provide a front end for his CFAX service. Yeah, the difference between the web interfaces that the broadcasters use and my online teletext viewer is that they obviously are in the business of presenting the information to their users, their viewers, in the most efficient and user-friendly and quick manner they can. So they have all the teletext pages from their system loaded into a separate system, which renders them out as maybe images or something where the images and the text can be displayed on the web page or the mobile phone app. Whereas my viewer, possibly a bit ridiculous, but it goes in the opposite direction of trying to emulate the behaviour of a television. So when you dial in a page number, for example, that page doesn't immediately load as fast as the server can send you the information, because it's trying to be teletext, and in fact it's being fed from an actual teletext packet stream. So just like on a television broadcast feeding into a television, if you've dialed in page 106, it has to wait for the transmitter to broadcast page 106 before it can display that on the screen. So that's, you might say that's a ridiculous backwards way round. You're making it harder for people to read the teletext than easier. But I do it that way because it provides a way to get the proper experience of teletext as though you were sitting down in front of a big CRT television with only no page cache memory and so on, and experience it the right way, because it's easy to look at pictures of screenshots of teletext pages, but that's not quite the same experience as interacting with a television that's receiving the pages packet by packet, line by line, and having them refresh onto the page when they're broadcast rather than when you're ready for them in some cases.
With the teletext editor, I know that you got a little flair for art yourself. Are there any particular styles of art that you like to produce?
It's calling myself a teletext artist came difficult because, to begin with, I really didn't feel like I was a teletext artist. I was experimenting with the teletext art to see what I could do, and then as I was writing more, putting more features into the teletext editor that other people wanted for their teletext art, I was having to test them, of course, and try out different ideas. And I got into it bit by accident that way, that I didn't start off intending to do teletext art. I started off intending to test the teletext editor, and just got more practice and more practice over time. As for what styles, I don't stick to any particular thing really. I struggle to think of subjects to do in teletext, and when I do, it's all different things really. I pick at different ideas and different styles. What I do tend to do a lot of is use the hold mosaics technique, where you bang your head against the wall for 3 hours and eventually a picture comes out that's got two colours next to each other. I do tend to overcomplicate the artworks.
Some of your over-engineered reproductions, though, are well known for having a lot of hold graphics in them. But it's not only art that you do. You do a lot of cleaning up of pages, and what are you cleaning up when you're having to do that? Are they recovered from videotape?
Yeah, well, the way I got into that really, in 2018, around Christmas time, I thought, well, this teletext recovery stuff, it looks quite fun, and I've got quite a lot of videotapes, so I think I'll have a go. So started setting up the hardware, getting the hardware set up that would be required to do the teletext recovery, and over that winter started capturing in and recovering from the text from some of my tapes. So I was working through those. By January 2020, I'd amassed a reasonable amount. I got into found some Turn of the Worm pages, and I figured, well, nobody else is doing anything with these. I'll start cleaning the Turn of the Worm pages up and maybe build a Turn of the Worm archive. as I say, I started the Turn of the Worm archive work in January 2020, and people were sending, other teletext recoverers were sending me their recoveries of Channel 4 teletext to extract the Turn of the Worm pages, and so I could start building an archive much bigger than the number of tapes I physically owned. I think I've only got three tapes with Channel 4 teletext from the 90s and 2000s, but before long people were feeding me hundreds of recoveries to start building this Turn of the Worm archive. What I do, I'm quite stubborn about it. Things only go into the archive when I'm sure that I've correctly fixed all of the teletext recovery errors. So when you're doing teletext recovery, the process will quite often damage bytes in the page. So letters, if you've looked at a recovered teletext page, you tend to get letters like E's become J's and things like that, which when it's a page of text it's quite easy to spot that a letter has changed and changed it back. But in the something like Turn of the Worm, which is a cartoon strip page, errors will change the mosaic blocks around, so you get black spots in the areas of colour where they shouldn't be, and pairs of pixels swap around and things like that. So it can be quite difficult to find every last one. But luckily, through the 90s at least, the teletext page checksum provides me with a way to confirm that I've got all the errors corrected, and at that point I can put it into the archive, and the completed Turn of the Worm stories are displayed in a little interactive viewer on my website as well.
You mentioned the amount of work that goes into recovering these teletext data off of old VHS tapes. What sort of equipment do you need to do this?
Well, the recovery stuff, there's quite a few people doing it now, but basically you need a PC with a video capture card. Now, the problem is that there's certain video capture cards which are known to work, and they're quite old, so they need a quite old PC to work with it, and the software all works best in Linux, so it's all a bit awkward to set up, but it's nothing rare and expensive, as it were. It's only ordinary PC hardware, but it's just the hardest part is getting all the software to talk to everything and work properly. Yeah, and it's a learning cliff to figure out the software rather than a learning curve. It's really a brick wall when you first start using it, but once it's set up, I mean, you just feed the tapes in and it captures the data, and off you go on to the next one. Really, obviously it takes 3 hours to feed a 3-hour tape into the video machine, but you can go away and do something else while it does that. The problem after you've processed all this stuff is that you've got hundreds of megabytes of data. Well, I mean, I've got gigabytes now collected on the PC, but what do you do with it all? There's all those thousands and thousands of teletext pages, but actually doing something useful with them, going through and seeing what you've got is a real... That's the biggest problem. Anybody can feed tapes in and feed tapes in and feed tapes in, but we need to find something to do with the data when we've finished. Because people were feeding me the recoveries for the Turn of the Worm archive, they were doing the same for Tim Bisley, who was processing all the stuff for Chris Bell's Super Page 58. He was doing all the digitizer pages. Around July last year, he had changes of circumstance in his life and didn't want to do that anymore. He sort of retired from the digitizer processing and handed that on to a couple of others of us. But at that point, I looked at all of the stuff I'd collected for the Turn of the Worm archive, and all of the stuff that he'd collected for digitizer, which he'd passed on to me, And basically I looked at it and thought, this is an absolute shambles. Nobody's ever going to find anything in here. We need to sit down and really rigorously decide what have we got, what can we do with it, and so on. So at that point it was July 2021, I started going through and really cataloguing all of the teletext recoveries that people had sent me, finding out, making sure that their dates were correct, and cataloguing them so I knew which TV channel and region they came from, what time of day the recording was from, and so on. And basically putting it into a monstrous spreadsheet, which has got out of control. But collecting all these things in a more rigorous, catalogued way, so that if somebody says, have we got a recovery from Channel 4 on the 7th of April 1997, I can look in the spreadsheet and say, yes, in fact we've got two, or whatever, here are the files. If you want to go and look for a page, you can dig it out of the archive, as it were. Yeah, that's what's taken over my life for the last year and a bit, is going through cataloguing all of the teletext recoveries that I and all the other teletext recoverers who've sent stuff into me have done, to really work out what we've actually got, or most of the backlog in. But since then, there's 2 or 3 more people come on board the team, new teletext recoverers who are doing their own cataloguing, as it were, to take some of the load off for that. Whether it's a sensible system and I'm doing it right, I don't know.
There's a channel you can turn on 24 hours a day for the very latest information on sport, constantly updated news, international and regional, TV gossip, local cinema, and music. Plus the latest information on holidays, finance, the environment, and more. And the amazing thing about this channel? You already have it. Teletext, the information channel, exclusively on ITV and Channel 4.
Have you had anybody contact you who may have, may have like sent a letter into a service and was wondering if you'd recovered a page with their letter published on the television? Because at the time, unless you had a very special television, there was, or took a photograph of the screen, there was no way of proving that you got anything up on any of the teletext services.
Apart from the odd Twitter thread about various nerdy teletext recovery bits I try to fly under the radar a bit in terms of being the public face of teletext archives and so on. Really, the teletext archaeologist Jason is the person who gets all of the attention, as it were, in terms of people wanting to know if the page exists and so on. I see my role more of a librarian, archivist type role, going through doing the boring spreadsheet work and moving the files around and
so you're
keeping records.
So you're more of the goods in the back rather than the shop window.
Yes, that's a good analogy, really. I do the turn of the worm stuff, and that's my front of house archive. Here's the pages I've found, sort of thing. But I mean, like I say, there's too much to go through the stuff looking for pages. Most of the time, when I get a new teletext recovery in, if it's Channel 4, I will do a quick extraction of the turn of the worm pages just to see which chapter of which story it is for my turn of the worm spreadsheet, and I will check that it's correct for the supposed date as a sort of a double check that the date hasn't been entered wrong. But for the most part, when somebody sends me a teletext page, when somebody sends me a new teletext recovery, I will check the date, channel, and time of day, and I'll put it into the system, into the spreadsheet, and I won't look at I'll look at page 100 to see what region it's from, to enter that data into the metadata. But beyond that, largely I won't look at any teletext pages in it, because I might be cataloguing 30 teletext recoveries that day. there's just so much to do. We need more people doing that, really, going through having. I sort of call it adopting a magazine or adopting a part of the service in the way that Chris Bell does such a great job on the Super Page 58, and Andrew Nile's been extracting the pages from the recoveries and cleaning them up for him. So that's sort of Digitizer is his magazine that he looks after, and he also does the magazine pages. I do the Turn of the Worm, and I'm also interested in the data broadcast stuff, so I go and have a good look at that.
Would that be the means where you could download a computer program for your computer at home via teletext through a modem?
Well, the downloading of software is something called telesoftware, and that was system CFAX had their telesoftware service, and the programs, BBC microcomputer programs, were encoded into a special format where they could be placed on teletext pages. So on Magazine 7, you got a few bits of pages to read on your television telling you what programs there are this month and computer news and so on. Then the rest of the pages there were all these densely packed pages of symbols and letters and just, basically just gobbledygook that the teletext adapter plugged into your microcomputer could receive those pages and decode them back into a program that it could run. So we've got quite a lot of that comes off the teletext recoveries, but if a page full of news and so on is easy to restore because it's English text and you can you know how words are supposed to be spelt, so you can tell what's been corrupted. The Turn of the Worm images or other teletext artwork is difficult to restore because it's the pixels move around and it's quite difficult to tell which pixels should be where and where else. The telesoftware is almost impossible to restore because you just look at it and you go, any of these 1,000 characters could be wrong, and it just looks like complete nonsense. But I have gone through and restored a few programs from a particularly clean recovery that one of the recoverers sent me. There was a telesoftware service on Oracle on Channel 4 which that catered to different computers. So the BBC, the CFAX system primarily was for the BBC microcomputer, and then they added IBM PC stuff a little bit later on. But they never carried anything for the Amstrad or the Spectrum and so on. But Channel 4's service, 4Tel, we're setting up the 4Data telesoftware service, and they got the teletext adapter developed by OEL as their, they branded that up with 4Data telesoftware or something for the Sinclair Spectrum, and there was an Amstrad version as well, and I think there was a BBC Micro version that you could get. The difficulty with the Sinclair Spectrum telesoftware was that it's a very underpowered machine. It's not got much RAM. The design of the teletext adapter, the firmware for it seems like it was rushed, and it never had the ability to do the very clever redefinable telesoftware format that the BBC were using for CFAX. The Amstrad version, the ROM for that did do it, but the Sinclair version was very crude. Basically just downloaded memory dumps from the teletext pages. It didn't take off in the way that the CFAX telesoftware did. possibly just because it didn't have a massive broadcasting corporation pouring money into it, forcing it to work. It had to deal with the economic realities of it being a dead end, really. But there's so many sections on all the teletext services that if people are interested in the recipes or the letters, back chat, and all those sort of things, if somebody is particularly interested in those parts of the service, if they want to adopt that as their thing, to go through and extract all the pages and clean them up and go through and really look for what is in there that's interesting, that's the people we need. We've got so many recoveries. I think there's maybe 10 people doing teletext recovery, and they're going through. We're getting hundreds and hundreds of tapes, thousands and thousands of pages. We need people not recovering the tapes. We need people looking at what's been recovered at this point, because there's just so much.
So for a cleaner, then, you're just looking for people who could perhaps receive the file, the raw file, and then just clean the page up for you.
Yes, I mean, obviously there's some teletext ability, understanding of teletext required, but that is something which can be trained. If people are interested in teletext, they can be shown how to do the file processing and so on to extract the pages.
So when you were recovering the turn of the worm, do you have any idea where you are, how many you've got left to do?
I do have some graphs that auto-generate when I put stuff in the spreadsheets, but to be honest, I rarely look at them. I've got quite a reasonable coverage of the 90s, and there's a lot of recoveries in the system for 2000 to 2006, was it, 2005, when the turn of the worm finished. But I've not been concentrating on the 2000s pages, because sometime in late 1999, either Teletext Limited or somewhere in the broadcast chain, the checksums, the generation of the page checksums got broken. So from that point on, and apart from a small few months somewhere in the middle where somehow it came back to life by itself, the checksums are broken, which means that when I've restored the page, I can't tell whether it's correct or not. I don't like to put the turn of the worm images up with errors, because if it's a badly damaged page and I'm fixing it up with no idea if I'm fixing it right, that's putting my artistic thoughts onto the page rather than really being a true archive of the original page. So I'm not sure really what I'm doing with the 2000s pages yet. I'm just collecting them. So hopefully I end up with enough clean copies of the page that I can say, this is what's come out of the recovery process, and I'm happy to say that's something I can archive.
Well, that's excellent, Alistair. With everything that you are doing with the cataloguing of the archive and all the recoveries, and then updating the editor, and then there's doing all the requests that everyone else wants to do, and with propping the system back up when someone reports that it's down or it's not working in Chrome. When you're not doing any of that, is there anything else that you like to do?
Sleep. It comes and goes. There's times when I can get into teletext, and then other times I'll go off and work on other hobbies, do retro computing stuff, or we've been decorating the house a bit lately, so I've been doing that, not paying attention to teletext really. So it comes and goes, and I'll work on these things when I work on them.
Well, thank you very much, Alistair. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, no problem.
Cheers. Alistair's work can be found at zxnet.co.uk. You have been listening to Teletext People. Teletext People is presented by me, Carl Attrell, and is a bite-high, no-limit production. I really enjoy doing these podcasts, but if you do want to help out with server costs, you can find out how to buy me a coffee in the links.